In today's video, we will go over our XML components, where you will be able to read XML locally or from your web service, as well as loading XML-based data. In our Integrated Services project, we can start in New Data Flow and find our first XML source component. Drag and drop into the Data Flow window and double-click to open. We have added the dummy destination components to showcase multiple outputs further into the video. We can briefly talk about each connection manager option, as this will be used to establish a connection to your XML file or web service. Local file may be selected when reading a file from a local path, and the local path may be provided or selected by clicking the ellipsis. When a file is selected, it will prompt to import the structure into the document designer. If Yes is selected, the XML design is generated in the document designer page. For the second option, File Content in Variable, this will use a variable and read the XML contents. This is helpful if the contents were stored to a variable from an upstream process. The design will not be automatically imported in this case, but we can later go to the Document Designer page and manually import. The third option, New, when selected, will take you to our HTTP Connection Manager component, where a connection can be established to a web service. Otherwise, if you have an existing connection already set up, this can be chosen. The HTTP method can be selected, and we currently support GET to retrieve data, POST to send data as a create or update action, PUT to replace or update existing resource, DELETE to delete a specified resource, PATCH to partially update an existing resource. The relative path is an optional field that may be provided if a portion of the URL will be dynamic for the requests. Note the FX icon seen on the right side. This will take you to the expression editor to provide the relative path dynamically. Query string parameters, name and value, may be added or existing ones removed. Note there is an FX icon here to set the value dynamically, and each parameter value may have its own expression. The second tab is used to add or remove request headers. They can be included by providing the header name and value. The Request Body tab is used to provide a body for the request. This would not be available for GET. The Import WSDL button is used to load a WSDL file locally or from a URL. Connection Manager can be provided. Otherwise, the WSDL file can be selected using the ellipsis. The Load WSDL file will populate the fields below based on the metadata within the file. SOAP version can select between version 1.1 and 1.2. Service, binding, and operation value can be selected. For the service, this defines the endpoint or address where the web service can be accessed. Binding specifies the protocol and data format used to communicate with the web service. Operation is the specific action or function provided by the web service. An example is retrieving or modifying data. In the Custom Header tab, any referenced headers would be populated here. For the WS Addressing Headers tab, any of the options may be enabled, which will provide a field to set a value when applicable. Unique Message ID for distinct data structure. Message destination or to. URL endpoint where the message is intended to be delivered. Source endpoint or from. Originating location or where the request is sent from. Reply endpoint or reply to URL. Service sends its response after processing a request. Fault endpoint. Fault to. Destination, where error messages are sent if error occurs during processing. Action, operation or function performed by the web service. Relationship, or relates to, logical connection between message, for example, such as request-response. The Namespaces tab will provide a list of prefixes and namespaces based on the service or WSDL file. Under the Advanced tab, field expansion depth can be adjusted. By default, this is set to 5, and this would be the level of recursion that is explored when processing a WSDL document. Generate request or response will populate a viewable request and response based on the details provided in the previous options. The Import section allows you to enable or disable the request or response body or HTTP headers or methods. Back in the data source page, the Request Again rule property can be set and will express to true or false, which decides whether the another batch is to be processed or the final batch has been reached during pagination. This is an important field when you expect the data to be split into multiple batches and can be parameterized to reflect this case. When we select the FX button, it takes us to the Expression Editor window. There are two modes available. There would be a drop-down for Proceeding Request. These internal functions would be helpful in building your Request Again rule. The other drop-down will list available project parameters or user variables. From the two modes mentioned, the first is the Text Merge mode. The property values will be the text entered, and any variable or token will be replaced with their value before the HTTP request is sent. The other option is Expression mode. An expression can be set, and it will be evaluated at runtime. In both cases, the current text or expression may be validated to see if it has any syntax errors. Going back to the last option on the data source page, the max identical value can be set and will raise an error if the threshold of identical requests meets or exceeds the value. Alternatively, set as 0 to disable this feature. This feature is helpful to prevent the same request being sent in an endless loop. In the second page document designer, we can see the design we have imported from the Connection Manager. We can also import at this stage from a WSDL file, XML local, XML web, or XSD local. The designer populates to the structure of the file chosen. We can export the current configuration as a designer.settings file, and if we go back to the Import dropdown, the first option can be used to import this same file type. This is a convenient way to share or save your current configuration when testing without having to share the package. If there are any changes, you can apply those manually within the document designer. Nodes can be manually added or removed. A node type can be changed under the Node Type column. The types available are element, as a container to hold text, attributes, or nested elements. Attribute, name-value pair within elements opening tag, used to provide additional metadata properties for the element. Raw, helpful if you want to retrieve the data exactly as it's seen in the document. Returned as the raw value. Node name is the name of the node within the document. If we go under Show All Columns, namespace specifies the namespace to which the node belongs to. Output, or column name that will be given to the output or column. Is repeated. Specify if a node is repeated within the document. This is available with the Show All Enabled option selected. For the output types, output will become a separate output along with its nested nodes. If we go to the next page, we can show that it has a separate output. Column. Data will be stored in column. Key value pivot can be used if the output settings of an element have keys specified, in which case the key value pivot may be set. In the output settings, click to configure the keys. Keys may be imported using an XML file, or expected keys can be added. After closing, lastly, an attribute would need to be set to a key. If we switch over the Additional Settings tab, there are some additional settings we can work with. We can specify the encoding from the drop-down. If there is a null, we can set how we would like to handle this in the null mode property, either as empty string, nil, or not found. The isRepeated text qualifier you may set to one of the characters or none. This is helpful when the isRepeated column is set to true for one or more nodes. The isRepeated text delimiter also has a drop-down where the specific character can be chosen. This is also helpful when the isRepeated column has been set to true for one or more nodes. The last option under this section can be enabled if node names are case insensitive. You may import namespaces from an XML file or manually include or delete any existing namespaces. In the next page, Columns, we can see the columns available from the current design. You can see the column names and their data type for each. Any fields you don't want to pass downstream may be unselected. If you have more than one output, you may select to work with the column associated to that output. Under the last page, Advanced, you can enable the HTTP request output, which will be found within a new output. To enable data truncation, you can check this option. The Preview button will take you to the Preview dialog screen, and the first request will be sent based on the configuration provided. You may also page through subsequent calls based on the configured request again rule. This feature is helpful to test the functionality without having to run the package. The FX icon can be used to work with the expressions editor. This will allow you to set available component properties dynamically as required. Once the configuration is complete, OK would be pressed to save the configuration. As we have an additional output, we can select each output path so their data may be processed downstream. Let's move on to the XML extract component. This component is similar to the XML source component, but it is a transformation component and has a few differences. The input would be XML documents from an upstream component, which can be extracted to produce columns data in the data flow. As an example, the source component has a field called person with the entire XML document, and this needs to be parsed out. In the data flow, the XML extract can be dragged and dropped, and then connect the source to our extract component. The initial page document designer allows you to manually add the nodes to build the structure, or the imported, as with our source component. Under the Additional Settings tab, you would need to select the upstream column where the XML document will be read. In our case, this would be the person column. There are additional properties: encoding, null mode, isRepeated text qualifier, isRepeated text delimiter. Node names can be treated as insensitive by enabling this option. The last section, namespaces, can be used to import namespaces from an XML file or add or remove any additional namespace by setting the prefix and namespace. Back in the Document Designer, we will import from a local XML file by selecting XML Local. Now under the Columns page, the columns will be populated. Any changes in the Document Designer would reflect under the Columns page. For example, the output type for address can be changed into an output. If we go back, address would be a separate output, and this would be helpful if splitting the nodes into multiple outputs is required in your business case. The error handling page has error handling mechanisms that can be set. By default, this is set to fail the flow on error, but you can choose to redirect rows to error output in the error path. The last selection would be to ignore any errors. Allow Data Truncation option will allow you to truncate and would be applied to all output columns. We can click OK to save and close the component. As we have two output columns and an error redirection path, we can connect a downstream component to each as needed. For demonstration, we can drag and drop dummy destinations. We can double-click any of the paths to see the metadata. A data viewer can also be enabled to inspect the column data being passed. The data has been parsed and the output created as columns format. XML documents can be easily parsed in this way. In a new data flow, we have a set of source components, and we would like to load the data using our XML destination component. The XML destination component can be used to write the merged XML document to either a local file, or the XML can be provided as part of an XML or SOAP-based service call. We can first drag and drop the XML destination component and map the data flow paths. The general page would look very similar to the XML source, where the connection manager can be chosen, either local file path or an HTTP connection manager. The existing connection manager will be selected for this demo. The same HTTP methods would be available under the dropdown: get, post, put, delete, and patch. The relative path under the request settings is used to specify the relative path after the base URL. The import WSDL would function the same as the XML source component, where a WSDL file may be loaded, which would include the service you are targeting, binding, operation addressing headers, and namespaces. Parameter names and values can be set for query string parameters. Any additional header names and values may be set under the Request Headers tab. Under the request body, we'll determine how the request body is provided. By default, merged XML will contain the merged XML data of the current batch, depending on how the document designer is configured, as well as how the merge mode is configured under the additional settings. Further into the video, more details on the additional setting will be elaborated on. In the document designer page, by default, the structure of the upstream data would be reflected in the document designer. The options at the top can be used to add, remove, or move nodes. You may also import the design from an XML file or a document designer file. There is an additional option called Inputs, which would populate the design from the upstream data structure. This would be helpful if there were any changes made, but reverting back to generated XML design based on upstream data is preferable. We have previously configured our document designer, so we can set using the designer settings. As mentioned in the XML, this option will also additionally save the configured document designer settings. There is an additional column is repeated that can be made available just like with the XML source by selecting Show All Columns. Based on the design, under the Inputs page, the inputs and their columns can be seen. If the name matches, the columns can be automatically mapped. Otherwise, you may select the input column to the XML field. Back in the Document Designer page, under Diagram View, this lets us see the inputs, associated columns, connections, and any changes made here would reflect in the Document Designer. This is helpful to visualize the upstream data structure and can be used to establish relationships between the inputs using this view. The Preview tab would provide a sample of how the XML file structure would be merged into the merged XML. This would be helpful to make sure the document has the same structure as the file or web service. Within the last tab, we have some additional options that can be configured. The first option is the encoding, and this lets you select the encoding of the document that will be written. Value null mode determines how null values are handled. XML nil to explicitly mark the element as null. Add as empty string or don't show. Print pretty is enabled by default. The merged document would contain the line breaks and indents. When false, this would output as a single line of text. If we enable hide declarations, this decides whether the XML should contain the XML declaration or not. The standalone option would be hidden if hide declarations is checked. This option would specify the standalone property to yes, no, or don't show. The merge mode dropdown would dictate how the XML data in each request is merged, and there are 3 options available. Our designer file saved this as every batch, and each batch as 1,000 rows of data, but by default, this is set to entire buffer, and this can be treated as an unlimited buffer size. As a result, one file will be created that contains the merged XML from all input rows. For the every row option, you may consider this as a batch size of 1, where each record is sent individually. For the option, link IDs are scrambled. If the link IDs for your inputs are not in order, you may select this option, but note, this may have an effect on performance. The next 2 options would describe how text values are formatted within the XML. The isRepeatedText qualifier would be the character selected that wraps a text value to distinguish it from delimiters. The isRepeatedText delimiter would be the character selected that separates multiple values in an element to split the values apart. In the next page, Input Columns, this will display the current mapping of the columns to the XML field in the Document Designer. Map unmapped fields can be used to automatically map fields if the name matches between the input column and XML field. Clear all mappings can be used to unlink all current mappings. Under the Namespaces section, we can manually add or remove any namespaces or import namespaces from an XML file. The Inputs columns, as we saw earlier, contains the input column and XML field that can be mapped to. If you have more than one input, you would be able to switch between them for configuration. Under the Output Columns page, this can be configured if you are expecting an array returned from the service with items matching input rows. The first option can be enabled if the response will be in array format. This will enable the response collection base path, which you may provide the base path as an XPath. The response item lookup strategy will also enable a lookup strategy that can be selected from the dropdown. Sequential strategy may be selected if there are an equal number of input rows and output array items, and they are matched in the order they appear. Item lookup strategy may be helpful when the output array items are not in the same order as the input rows. When selected, you may define an item key to determine how input rows are matched to output array items. An expression for item key would need to be defined, and will be evaluated for each input row in the batch and each array item in the response. This will return true for a match and false when not a match. If custom output columns are required for further integrations downstream, you may provide a column name, the relative XPath, and data type details under the column properties. You may check the option Overwrite Input if the input should be overwritten. The last section lets you decide if you want to optionally include any of the HTTP diagnostic as output columns. We will select all the additional request and response output columns: URL, method, headers, body. In our destination and transformation components, the last page error handling is included, and this allows the selection of how to handle the error records or the entire execution when an error occurs. By default, this is set to Fail on Error, which halts the entire execution. But you may ignore the error or redirect it to the error output path. Redirecting the error rows to the error path allows you to continue the execution and divert the error rows to a separate path for further processing or logging. To save the current configuration, press OK to save and close the component. The blue path is the default path where the successfully written rows of data are sent, which can also allow for further integrations as required. The additional HTTP request and response columns we checked from before are available here. When the red error redirection path is selected, this will provide additional error columns. The path can also be double-clicked to show the additional error columns generated. Lastly, any orphaned children rows will be included under its own output error path. The XML merge component is a transformation component used to take upstream column data and merge it into one SSIS column based on the configured XML structure. The merged column can be loaded using a downstream SSIS component. Within our example, we have two spawned sources of data that we would like to merge into a single XML document. In our SSIS toolbox, we can drag and drop the XML merge component. The initial page is the document designer, and this has 4 additional tabs available: the details view that we are currently in, diagram view, preview, and additional settings. This page allows you to manually add or remove nodes to build the XML document structure or import from an existing document. Let's import from an existing file for the structure required. After the nodes are populated with values in the node type, node name, the column name, source type, any format strings is required, and node write settings. One additional column is repeated is available when we click Filters Columns and Show All Columns. This can be used to specify if a node is repeated within a document. We want to add another input, and this can be done by changing the source type to input. We would also need to map the relationship. This can be done under the node write settings. When the document structure is correct, the component's configuration can be saved and closed. In order to map the upstream components we had ready from before, after mapping the source data to the correct inputs, and we can go back to the document designer page. In the diagram view, you can see the previous link created before. You may also edit any relationships between your inputs in this tab, as well as create or remove any nodes. Address is a child of the root, so the root link ID is mapped to the link ID of person. The Preview tab will show a sample of the document that will be merged with placeholder values. In the last tab, Additional Settings, you would see familiar settings as the destination component. The type of encoding can be selected. Value null mode for how to handle null values. Print pretty is enabled by default. The merged document would contain the line breaks and indents. When false, this would output as a single line of text. If we enable hide declarations, this decides whether the XML should contain the XML declaration or not. This standalone option would be hidden if hide declarations is checked. This option would specify the standalone property to yes, no, or don't show. The merge mode dropdown would dictate how the XML data in each request is merged, and there are 3 options available. By default, this is set to entire buffer, and this can be treated as an unlimited buffer size. As a result, one file will be created that contains the merged XML from all input rows. For the every row option, you may consider this as a batch size of 1, where each record is sent individually. Lastly, for every batch, an explicit batch size can be provided, and the merged XML would contain the specified number of records in each request. For the option, link IDs are scrambled. If the link IDs for your inputs are not in order, you may select this option, but note, this may have an effect on performance. The next 2 options would describe how text values are formatted within the XML. The isRepeated text qualifier would be the character selected that wraps a text value to distinguish it from delimiters. The isRepeated text delimiter would be the character selected that separates multiple values in an element to split the values apart. The last section is the namespaces. This would allow you to import namespaces or edit any of the existing ones from the XML document. Under the Columns page, you can see the same columns reflected for each input. And here, you can map any of the input column fields to their respective XML field. In the last page, Output and Error Handling, you can name the merged XML column name. By default, this would be called Merged XML. Lastly, similar to the other transformation and destination components, the error handling can be managed by failing when an error occurs, redirecting the rows to a separate error output path, or ignore the error. Once the component is set, OK can be clicked to save and close the current configuration. We can move on to the XML extract task component by dragging and dropping from our SSIS toolbox window while we are in the control flow. Open to see the general page. For the connection manager, you may connect to the web service using an HTTP connection manager. The existing HTTP connections would be visible here, or a new one can be created by selecting the new option. Local file type, if you have a local XML file to extract from. Local file path property is made available to set the path to your local file. File content in variable can be selected if the content of an XML document is stored within a variable. Once selected, you will also need to select the appropriate input variable from the dropdown. In this example, we can select the existing HTTP connection manager. The code page dropdown is used to specify an encoding. Under the request settings, the HTTP method may be selected when sending the request. The available options are get, post, put, delete, and patch. The relative path field allows you to specify a string containing the relative location of the URL that the request will be sent to. The query string parameters allows you to provide parameters and their value that will be appended to the end of the request. Request headers allows you to provide additional headers and their value, which will be included as headers in the request. With the request body, you can configure the body within your request. Note that this is not available for the get method, but would be available for the other methods, such as delete, patch, post, and put. In the left corner, the FX option can be used to parameterize the properties available in the component. This is helpful when you need to dynamically provide a value within a property. Under the Output page, we can set the XPath for the node we wish to read. The node's value would be written into an output variable. You can select or create a new variable. Lastly, if the node cannot be found based on the XPath, you can treat this as a not found error by enabling the checkbox. Under the Namespaces section, you may add namespaces by setting the prefix and the accompanied namespace. In the Error Handling page, we can select how to handle when an error occurs. By default, this will fail on error. Write error to variable can be selected, and the error message will be written to the variable you have set. Ignore error would skip the error and continue the execution. Once the configuration is done, we can click OK to save and close our current configuration. Thanks for watching. We hope this video has helped you understand how our XML components and tasks work, so you may implement them in your own integrations. KingswaySoft, data integration made easy.